Leaders have layers, shaped by stories and struggles that are often unseen. In each episode, we peel back those layers, hearing from leaders whose paths may look nothing like yours, yet whose insights will feel strikingly relevant. You'll walk away with fresh eyes, ready to disrupt the status quo. This is Outsider Unscripted.
Welcome to Outsider Unscripted. I'm Sadie here with my co-host Jamey Gadoury, and today we get the opportunity to interview LaJoye, the SVP Global Sales of Trintech. So we're so excited to have you here today and look forward to diving into getting to know you more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and looking forward to it.
Yeah, and so you and Jamey have worked together in leadership development over the past 6 years on and off, but this is my first time getting to hear more about you. So could you give us a little snapshot of where you are right now, like in life, maybe even a hobby, some things that you love?
Sure. Well, I'm coming up on a big birthday milestone in the end of November, and don't know if I'm looking forward to it. So, hitting one of those bigger numbers. But no, life is good. I'm originally from Michigan. I've been down in the Dallas area it'll be 7 years in January, which happens to coincide with my starting point at Trintech. So, somewhat considering myself a Southerner these days, but still have a lot of Midwest in me as well. But really enjoyed it down here. Really enjoyed my time at Trintech. As you mentioned, been working with Jamey. I think it's almost going on 6 years, probably at this point too. So, gotten to know him quite well through the years. A lot of help and support from his end and in my own growth and just some of the growth I've seen here at Trintech. So, looking forward to kind of chatting through some of that.
So let's kind of dive into your mindset on as a leader because you've been very successful in your career. Is there a moment or story that has influenced your mindset as a leader?
Sure. It's probably a few things, honestly. So as I mentioned, I from Michigan originally, so spent most of my life there, prior to moving to Dallas. And I grew up in a small town about an hour north of Ann Arbor. Small town of all of about 2,000 people, very, very blue collar. And I mean that as a true compliment, a lot of automotive jobs back then, at least when I was growing up. Come from a family that's a little bit larger. So I actually have 5 older sisters. So there's certainly some influence there. I was the youngest and the only boy. My dad was a cop for almost 30 years, 28, I believe it was. And 16 of those, he was a sheriff of our county. So elected 4 times in a row to that role. We kind of had it instilled in us, all of us, all the kids, in the sense of, you're going to work hard, you're going to get out there and roll up your sleeves. And, there are no excuses, right? We all went to college. We all had that expectation set young in life. And even when I think about my sisters, all 5 of them really are in leadership roles themselves. I've got one that runs a pastor or a church, one that's also a sheriff herself of one of the largest counties in Michigan, one that's been a CEO multiple times, one that's a teacher, one that's also kind of in a sales leadership role herself. So it's just kind of always been the expectation, and that's kind of what was drilled into us at a young age, and really thankful for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. 5 sisters, the youngest of 5. That's awesome. I feel like
I
you
got
probably
tortured.
learned a lot from that. You got tortured.
I got tortured. I mean, they used to, I grew pretty fast when I was young, but before that happened, and they were bigger, they would pin me down and it'd be kind of the tickling who's the favorite. And you name one, the next one does it. I really couldn't win. So luckily by, 6th grade, I got to about 6'1", and, some of that torment stopped. But yes, I've had 5 sisters in the corner my whole life. So been a very good thing. But, as you might imagine, a few opinions along the way too.
Yeah.
How does that play out now? I mean, do you still get tortured?
Luckily some of that stopped, but they don't hold back, right? If they have an opinion on something, they're going to let me know. Whether it's in the family group chat or Christmas holidays and all that good stuff. So, luckily I got thick skin, so I can handle it and kind of give it back to them. But no, it's always been good. I have 5 sisters, got 10 nieces and nephews. In fact, I have my oldest sister. Her oldest daughter is a couple months older than me.
Oh,
So
wow.
just kind of a diversity too across the family in terms of age ranges. It's been fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like that's probably impacted you as a leader, of understanding people and
Absolutely.
being the one picked on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And jokes aside about that, I've learned a lot from them through the years, right? Growing up, my youngest sister to me in age, she's about, I think, 6.5 years older. And if she watches this and I have that wrong, I'll hear about it. But, even her, by the time I was in early high school, she was in college. And by the time I got closer to college, she was already into her career. Four other sisters that were, already gone down, those tracks as well. So, just good role models, right, across the board
Hmm.
in terms of learning from, things to do, things not to do. Between those five, my mom, my dad, I just had a lot of good examples of how to do things the right way. Um, so certainly that's experience I lean on often, whether it's professionally, personally, that doesn't matter. Um, but it's almost like the five voices on your shoulder always have a sense of what they're going to say. So it sticks with me. And in case I don't have that sense, they're always quick to remind me too.
Yeah. You mentioned just kind of there's always that example. Do you have like a skill or an attribute that you would say that you've seen in them or that you've seen in yourself that's helped you in your career or your life and your relationships?
I think we all take after my dad in a lot of ways, right? And you can even see the parts of my dad that each of us probably took from him, right? Um, I think the thing that I've learned either from them, from my dad, et cetera, is just to be yourself. You've got to be real. I don't care what the role is, but certainly in a leadership role, I think people see through that if you're not.
Mm.
I think it comes across disingenuous, fake, whatever you want, whatever word you want to use for it. But just being true to who we are. We know how to give tough love, but we also know how to give love to and support our people. So I think that's something I've seen time and time again from them. Especially the one sister who's a sheriff of one of the largest counties in the state, one that's been an executive at multiple companies. I've definitely seen from those two in terms of leading large organizations. It starts from a place of wanting people to be successful. As long as you have that kind of in the forefront of what you're trying to achieve, I think it makes a lot of other things easier in terms of leading people, having people that want to follow you. So I've definitely taken that to heart over the years.
Because I heard in a short interview that you had done that you said at the end of the day, it's about relationships. And so I
Yeah.
feel like that kind of ties in. Could you expound a little bit more of what brought you to that understanding and your view of that?
I think that's kind of heart of everything in life, right? Or at least it should be for a lot of people. What we do is hard. It's not saving lives. It's not being a doctor or anything like that. But it's chaotic, and Jamie's seen that firsthand working with a lot of us. There's a lot of pressure. It's very fast paced. If you don't keep the relationships of either your direct reports or other team members on the team, or even cross functionally others that you work with on a regular basis, it it really makes this even harder. When you're pushing people to achieve and to maybe go above and beyond what they feel comfortable or even think they can do themselves, uh, you got to be able to have that relationship, to have those tough conversations, to push them so they know it's all coming from a good place. If people on my team, especially in a sales oriented role, if they think I ultimately only care about numbers, which the numbers are important, that is our day job, but if that's all they think I care about, I would believe that they're probably not going to go above and beyond. They're going to see themselves as just another piece of the machine, and that's all we care about. A lot of people work a lot of hours here, and I make sure that's not unnoticed, but I also make sure I'm doing the same thing. If I'm
Mhm.
not leading by example, if I'm not right there with them in the trenches, I don't think it'll be successful. And that's just kind of my personal viewpoint. I know there's different approaches, but you want to enjoy who you work with. You want to enjoy who you work for. We spend a lot of time here. Life is short, so want to make sure people enjoy the people they're surrounded with.
We were able to get a little bit of input and a cheat sheet from some folks that know you,
Oh boy,
and
this
what
this
exactly
wasn't in the preparation document.
it was not. So Becca Ellis wanted us to ask you about individual personalities and how you do that on a team when people have maybe stark differences, but how do you kind of wrangle all of that together in a way that helps the team? And I'm gonna put you on the spot because she said he's a really good leader at leaning into individual personalities and knows how to extract or grow the talent by focusing how they learn best or the environment they thrive in. So with that compliment, how have you done that? No pressure.
Becca's one of my favorite former employees. So she moved on a couple years ago, but I've stayed in touch with her and even got to know her husband a little bit through the years as well. Um, in fact, I think at one point I told her that she wakes up and chooses violence some days. Very very hyper, motivated person, but no, she's great. Um, I think it's important, and obviously we've done some of this work together too, Jamie, and done it with other people on the leadership team. You have to try and understand your people. If you're expecting them to meet your personality at all times, I just think you're going to cause conflict, or it's going to cause conflict, right? Not to say there's not necessarily time for that at times, right? But if you can try and understand where your people are coming from, what makes them tick, what motivates them. Yeah, I used to have an old boss that insisted that you tell him what your why is, and I understood the reasoning of it. I don't necessarily care what someone's why is as long as they have one, right? There's got to be something that drives you. There's got to be something that motivates you. And it's important as a leader to get to know what those things are, get to know the personality traits so you can choose the times to give that tough love, or when maybe you need to be a little bit more of a therapist, let them vent, let them get some frustrations out. And honestly, that probably does going back to Five Sisters. There's some things I probably learned there through the years, and how to kind of recognize behavior. And I try to be very self-aware of people, what's important to them, what makes them tick. Otherwise, I worry that messaging falls on deaf ears, and it goes back to the relationship piece too. Like, I want to care about people. I enjoy caring about people, and I enjoy them being successful. And I don't think you can do that and get to that point if you don't know more about them.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Becca also wanted us to ask you about the Lions and Wolverines, which the week that she sent this, they had done poorly, which was part of why she wanted me to ask.
Yeah.
But this is going to air later, so we don't know what that's going to look like. But tell me a little bit about that. You mentioned growing up near Ann Arbor.
Yep.
I appreciate a little bit of the Michigan sports, just overall fandom, if you will. I've got some cousins down in Kalamazoo, big Tom Brady fan, etc. But
Yeah.
is there a story you could tell or a moment that would help everybody understand sort of this in the case of at the college level, almost this rabid fandom that you have,
Yeah.
and in the case of the professional side, I know it's been a lot of years of pain and torture and relational damage. So
You're going to make me sad just thinking about that pain. No, it's funny. In fact, I think Becca's husband texted me on the weekend or the week you're thinking of, because he's a big Packers fan. And so the first game of the season, the Packers, they kind of gave it to Detroit, but two strong bounce back wins here the last couple of weeks. But no, on the Michigan side, so like I mentioned, I grew up in a small town in Michigan, about an hour north, and pretty much up until I was in high school or maybe even college, my dad had season tickets to Michigan. So, 6 or 7 Saturdays of every fall, I mean, they were going down doing big tailgates with a bunch of friends that also had season tickets. So went to, plenty of Michigan football games. And, that was kind of the religion within the household, right? Saturday at noon, at least more back then. It's just changed a lot these days. Saturday at noon, Michigan's kicking the ball off. And then I went to college on the west side of the state. I didn't take academics probably as serious as I should in high school. So Michigan was not an option for me at that point. But my first job out of college was in Ann Arbor. So I actually lived there for about 10 plus years, just prior to moving to Dallas. So it's just there's just a lot of passion there, and the college sport, it's changing. There's money involved, or a lot more money involved than there used to be. But there's just still something to it. The tradition, the rivalries. Michigan versus Ohio State, Michigan versus Michigan State, which I know that's not nearly as big on a national scale, but it's just things that you can kind of look back through the years when you spend those big games or those big moments with your family. In my case, with my dad. One of my sisters that's here in Dallas, she went to Michigan. Her and her family are huge U of M fans. So it's just something that kind of brings the family together. It's almost like a love language. It's always something that you have to talk about, even if you're in spring or middle of summer and football's kind of off in the distance. It's just that one kind of conversation topic you can always bring back to the table. But on the Lions, the Detroit Lions, for about 30 years, they were the absolute laughing stock in the NFL. They had two of the absolute best players at their respective positions, Barry Sanders, Calvin Johnson. They both retired young in their careers because the Lions were so bad, just terrible. And so a couple of years ago, the Lions had a home playoff game, and I went to it with my wife, and it was their first playoff win. I think it was 25, 30 years. People in the stands were crying. They are, it's a diehard fan base that through all that terribleness continued to show up and be there. And it's really kind of a reflection of City Detroit, which, blue collar, hardworking, supports their teams. And, it's been fun to kind of see them get to a competitive spot. That year they kind of had their heart broken in the NFC Championship game, but they're still rolling. So there's hope. This is the year.
I love how you shared that it's kind of it's about relationships as well and how that's kind of connected the city and you and your family and you and your dad across time.
Yep.
It's really cool. So what I'm hearing from a lot of the things you mentioned as leadership with your team and what you care about, it's understanding the people, making sure, yeah, that there's a healthy relationship within that to help them thrive because you know that why are you putting in your time if you don't
Yep.
feel cared about, people don't feel motivated. So do you have a story of a leader either supporting you in that way or not supporting you in that way that's kind of made you that type of leader that can see those things?
I've had some previous leaders. I learned a lot on how not to do things, right? That would be something I take away from the earlier half of my career. At Trintech, I've got a great boss today in Piatra. I've worked with him now for a couple of years, just a very genuine human. I think very similar in the sense of cares about his people, wants them to be successful, comes from that place naturally. My first couple of years at Trintech, I had a chance to report to who is now our CEO and Darren. Learned a ton from him. And still work with him closely, but in those couple of years where I reported directly to him, it's hard to put value on reporting to someone that will become a CEO only a couple of years later. So, just understanding how he viewed the business, things that were important to him, the level of urgency that you need on certain topics, and the level of accountability. Not that I didn't know it, but to be able to learn from a senior leader like that, kind of earlier in my career, it was invaluable. So definitely have been very fortunate in the support and mentorship I've had, not only from my direct bosses over the last, almost 7 years here, but just also some of the peers I work with across the business. There's just a lot of great people here that when you're in a little bit of a smaller company relative to, what you might consider an enterprise level company, you got a lot of hardworking people here that are putting in a lot of hours, a lot of sacrifices, a lot of miles on the road. And I'm always trying to pick their brains, even when they don't realize that's what I'm doing. I'm always attempting to learn and pick from where I can take things. And, been fortunate that there's a good group of people here that you can do that with.
I know a couple of those years were pretty tough. Can you give some color to that of just like what was the difficulty? What was the pressure? I know. And then how did you and the team get through that?
Yeah, I guess I got to go backwards to give a little context to that. So, where I came from, Thomson Reuters, previous to my time at Trintech, the division I was a part of there, it was a very high performing division. And we were judged more on a monthly basis versus a quarterly basis. So every single month we had a month end, and it was always all hands on deck. And then, of course, the quarter ends and then the year end. And that division or that company was a calendar year end. So that always rolled right into New Year's. And we were there till a lot of cases 8 or 9 o'clock on New Year's Eve because that was the last day of the year. And that's just the mindset and the mentality I kind of grew up in from a professional perspective. And so when I came to Trintech, Trintech had just done an acquisition about a year prior to me joining. And at that time, they'd made a decision to actually kind of separate the company into two different business units. And the North America team for the new business unit, which was the one I was originally a part of, in a lot of ways, it was essentially a startup. The product that we had acquired had a heavy European customer footprint, but really at that time, very few customers in the US. And so we had hired collectively across the board a brand new team to kind of support that. And, as I'm sure a lot of startups can share, that success doesn't come overnight. And so we were having to scratch and claw for every single thing. And I can reflect back on that and be very thankful for that experience because it was so different from what I was used to. But yeah, there were some tough days early on. But the team that was there at the time, we all worked together so closely. I mean, it truly, for every deal we brought in the door in those early years, it was a collective from Darren to myself to some of our previous sales leaders, some of our account executives at the time. It was all hands on deck, and we had a lot of fun. And we were in a completely separate building at the time, so it was pre-COVID. It really did have a startup feel, but I wasn't used to. Not having the level of success from the world I'd come from. So it was
Mm,
kind of good to actually get knocked down a level or two and learn how to roll the sleeves up even further and get us to the point that where we're at today.
that's great. So if you could kind of taking what you learned from that, if you were to tell yourself right when you guys were kind of in that startup phase, what are some of the things you would want to remind to tell yourself then?
The end of the world when things don't go right. You got to remember that, right? We're not curing cancer. We're not doing things like that. But it is practicing urgency at all time. We're a decent sized company. We're not small, but we're not large either. There's a lot of competitors in the market. We've got to fight for every dollar, and we can't be complacent. We can't take things for granted. Um, just because you roll your sleeves up on one deal, it doesn't mean you don't also have to roll your sleeves up on the next five. And that can run people out a little bit. That can tire you out, but that's the world we're in, and you just have to remember that. But when you do that and you do the right things and you put the right foot forward, we have very compelling products that can really help our customers. And when we put the effort in that's necessary, and we show those prospects and or customers how we can help them, how we can support them, um, we've got great products. We can be successful. And in the last few years, I mean, we've had record result after record result, and that is from all of the effort. And I think we have a lot of great people on the team, and not just my team. I think we've got a lot of great people across the organization that are all kind of rowing in the same direction. And I think that's been a very concerted effort on our part as a company to get to this place.
That's awesome. And I love how you said that not that you wanted to be knocked down, but that you kind of had to get and roll up your sleeves a little bit more and that overall kind of grew you as a person. I think that's great to probably see as a leader to be in the trenches together kind of really connect you guys.
It is, and
Mm.
failure's terrible, right? No one wants to fail, but naturally everyone does. So you can't avoid it first and foremost. But it's not the worst thing, right? As long as you look for the lessons in it and you learn from it. Every now and then it's actually a good thing, and you can pretend that you're unhappy about it, and you want to make sure you send the right messages out, but it can really be used as kind of that catapult to kind of get the team to the next level. Now, if you put your head down and pout about it, then yeah, it's not a good thing. But if you look for the lessons in it that there always are, I think there's a lot of good that can come from it.
So we all have our strengths, and sometimes the strengths that we have can bring about a blind spot a little bit. Was there ever a time that you became aware of a blind spot, and how did you handle that?
I got a few. Um,
Don't we
listen,
all?
I think one of my struggles, I'd like to think I work hard, right? I will put the time in. I certainly have that expectation for my team as well. Uh, I think where I struggle sometimes is when I believe others don't do that, don't have that same level of commitment. And I probably make that conclusion too quick sometimes, right? That's something I've had to kind of work on through the years and try and grow in. Uh, you never know what's going on in someone's life. One, you could be wrong. Maybe they are putting plenty of time in, you just can't see it. But even if they're not, you don't always know what's going on, right? There could be real life situations that are impacting kind of what's going on in their day to day, and trying to kind of have a more open mind to that, and not making fast conclusions. So that's a blind spot I've definitely worked on through the years. I wouldn't say I'm perfect at it yet, but I think I'm getting better. We'll have to ask others, but
Yeah.
it's at least been something I've been conscious of.
Yeah. Well, based on the quote that he shared, it sounds like you're doing a really good job with that of
Yeah,
getting to
no,
know the person and like helping them progress kind of wherever they're at.
well, I appreciate Becca. I'm sure I gotta work on it a little bit more, but yeah, that's and I think some of that comes with age too. Age and
Yeah.
experience helps in that. I think when you're a little younger, you're probably a little more hyper on certain things. So, just kind of going through multiple rounds of great results, good results, and mixed results, all those things, just it all kind of shapes you and it helps you get to a better place.
Well, I'll up the ante too on Becca's comment, because she also said, professionally, I learned the most about what good leaders look like from Jesse and Darren at Trintech. So shout out to Darren there as well.
No, that's great. I
And that,
will. It's a good reminder to send my Venmo to her later.
that's right. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Well, and to kind of respond to what you've been talking about, I feel like good leaders, at least in my experience, is when they do, acknowledge maybe a shortcoming and then own it or grow through the failure. I feel like that is such an example of great leadership. I think sometimes leadership can be like, oh, you have to be perfect, but you guys, it sounds like, have been demonstrating really good leadership.
I hope so. Right.
Yeah,
Not something you can be perfect at. I would
totally.
like to think a really important part for me is accountability. I will be the first cheerleader when we win deals, and I don't care how big the deals are, small, medium, large. You're never going to hear what I did. It's going to be what the team did in those
Hmm.
examples. But when things don't go well, you can't hide from it. You've got to be accountable. It's very easy to point fingers and get into that mindset, and you're always going to have that. There's always going to be people that's their kind of natural inclination, but you can't fix anything, you can't improve anything if you're not accountable to it.
Hmm.
And so it's easy to take the praise when things go well, but you got to be the first person in line when things don't.
That kind of ties into my next question is what advice would you give to others who are wanting to grow in leadership or personal growth? And accountability sounds like one. If you have others, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, certainly accountability. I kind of mentioned it earlier. Just be yourself, which I think is tough for younger leaders, and it was tougher for me a few years ago when I really kind of started down this track. But just be yourself. Don't force being something that you think you have to be because you have a leadership title. You'll come across uncomfortable. I think people see through that pretty quickly. Uh, People want to follow people they care about and know that they care about them, like we kind of talked about earlier. So building those relationships is a real key. That's the foundation of everything that comes after that. And the other thing, and I don't know if this is specific to leadership or just in general. I think my team's probably heard me say this more than a few times, and they probably turned it into a drinking game. But no one's going to give you anything, right? You've got, and no one's going to give you anything, nor are they going to feel bad for you. And that was definitely life advice I heard young and often growing up. And you got to be willing to fight for what you want. I think there's sometimes a view of leadership is you get to sit in the office and be cozy and this and that. And if anything, it's by far the hardest job I've ever had. Not to take away from individual contributor jobs, because those are very difficult too, and I've done that as well. But there's a lot of pressure that comes with this, and you got to be willing to fight for it and scratch and claw, while keeping your team at the forefront of everything you're doing.
You're answering these questions really well. I'm just going to see which ones I'm missing right now. Is there something that you're working on at your job right now or just in your life that you're passionate about at the moment?
This year was a change in my role. Took over responsibility for our European sales team as well. So, just getting my arms around that this year with some of the leaders over there has been a real pleasure, honestly. It's a part of the world that I won't pretend to be an expert on. Every day I feel like I'm learning a little bit more and more. L- Plenty of different countries and nuances to each one of them. So, just coming into that with a mindset, as I've said to that team there, I, I'm not going to try and come across as the American that pretends, in this case, he knows everything about your side of the world. So really try to come into it with an open mind, impact change where I believe I can, but also be open to things that are cultural and country based. So had opportunity to be over there a couple times this year. We'll certainly be over there again before the end of the year. So from a work perspective, that's certainly kind of been kind of the big mission this year. And there's a lot of good things starting to happen there. So it's been exciting to see.
I want to pull that thread a little bit about just global leadership. And I think for probably most of us humans, when we're learning a new area, we want to put things into buckets that we already have, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, if I think about leading a team in Europe, it's like, okay, what's Europe look like? But then, well, Europe looks like a lot of different countries, right? Or even some of the work we've done, it's like, well, we're working with the Nordics. Okay, well, does that mean that Norway is the same as Denmark? And I've heard they're not, right? So there's like cultural differences, nuances. Where are some of the things that you've realized, some of those layers or nuances or assumptions, and had to course correct along the way to help kind of paint that picture for folks?
I think one of the things, I kind of mentioned it, right? And you just hit on it too. Every country is unique, right? And you could say the same thing about the US in terms of the states. Every state has its flavor, but overall, there's more of a kind of a US culture by and large across the country. It is different there, right? Where, to your point, the UK is different than Norway, different than Sweden. Um, what I've had to try to balance is where that is accurate, and I need to keep an open mind and make sure we are keeping that in the picture of the discussion we're having, versus where that might be a natural thing for them to say just to, you know, maybe do things in a certain way. But I'm fortunate. We've got really good people over there. We've got a great sales leader, Sarab, who of course you've had a chance to meet, several times. We've got a great GM and Scott, who is kind of overcharged the entire region. So those are people I can lean on, right? To know when I can call BS, or when it's the American in me that needs to have the open mind and appreciate there are absolutely nuances to the conversation we're having. So, but it's a learning experience. Every day I wake up, and I now wake up to a lot more emails than I used to, and certainly a lot more Teams messages, because they're halfway through the day in some cases. It's a balancing act, but it's been really good. I wouldn't have it any other way. It's just good to have that exposure and just the ability to learn about so many unique cultures.
So, do you guys want to go ahead and touch a little bit on the type of leadership development that you guys work together on, and maybe how that's impacting you and what that looked like?
Sure. So I think I mentioned at the beginning, I've had the opportunity to work with Jamey for pushing on probably over 6 years now. Somewhere in that first year when I was at Trintech. So I think it's been great. I've had a chance to work with Jamey one-on-one, but also in multiple different group settings across, larger leadership teams. And, it kind of comes back to some things we've already talked about today, right? There's the relationship aspect and the personality aspect. And, some of the work we've done is really understanding at deeper level what makes every person on the team tick. Some of their healthy ticks, and maybe some of the things that can kind of set them over the edge. And, it sounds simple on the surface, but it's not, right? One, everyone's personality is rather complex, but it's also not simple in the sense that is how you should try and engage with people as much as you can. And some days, the meetings are stacked up, and it's hard to always keep that front of mind. But the more that you can, in terms of the things that drive people, don't drive people, it can help shape your interactions. It can help show you, what might be a more beneficial approach in terms of how you engage with so and so. So I have found it to be very beneficial. And like I said, the comments I've made about, we're not curing cancer, we're not doing this. It's pretty hard to complain to Jamey about how tough your job and environment is when you're talking to someone that served the country and has been in battle zones. And he just brings such a calming presence to conversations that you would think are so important, so intense. In reality, they're not. Maybe they are within the Trintech reality, but in the grand scheme of things, there are much more important things. So I've really enjoyed my work with him and the team, and I know I'm not the only one here that would say that. So, I think it's been a big help to my career. As I said, 6 years ago, and I've had the opportunity to grow into multiple roles, and I think that's certainly been a piece of it.
Appreciate that, Jesse. And I think back to some of those first months and years, and you've said it a number of times on this, just about the relationships. But I remember that, of getting to watch, in particular, Darren, who continues to put that. Like, I've seen multiple groups at Trintech where he just pushes the expectation that you're not just doing the work, right? You've got to invest time in being together, breaking bread together, spending time together in evenings, because the business runs on the relationships, right? It's critical.
Yep.
And if I can't have relationship, then that really makes it hard to have trust in the day-to-day of the business, and so on. I'll say the other thing that I think really continues to impress me. You mentioned the, what makes us tick in good ways and what makes us tick maybe in bad ways. And I think the receptivity of that culturally that I've seen with your teams and the other teams at Trintech is that that's accepted as normal, right? And I've worked with organizations that more will say maybe want to weaponize
Yeah.
a flaw, right? Like, haha, now I've got a code that I can use against you, 3 months from now, right? And that's not what I see. And sometimes I think about is it the development mindset that's already there in software? Is it just the unique culture, whatever it is? But I continue to see that of where, generally speaking, people are like, yeah, I accept that. Like, you've got flaws, I've got flaws. How do we work better together? Which I think is crucial for teams to establish that as baseline.
I can just think of so many conversations, whether it's with people on my own team or people across the business, that I've gotten to know, right? Through those dinners or happy hours or team sessions, kind of going through all that, that you just know them at a better level. And even if it's simple surface level things, right? It's just a connection point. We talked about football earlier, things like that, or when you know about someone's family or dogs, whatever their passions may be or hobbies, just that alone gives you a starting point. It kind of gives you that launching point into a conversation, that helps disarm people versus jumping right into whatever the topic at hand may be, which sometimes could be maybe more of a contentious topic, maybe not, but it makes things easier. I think there's zero doubt about that.
I got to throw it's not a curveball, but only slightly off topic. What's going on with AI? What do you know? What are you learning? What are you doing? I feel like everybody's trying to figure that out. Where are you at?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. It's it's actually, I was thinking about this a few months ago. It's probably the first time I'm starting to feel my age a little bit, where, a little bit earlier in my career, or even college, high school age, I felt like I knew everything technology wise and this and that, and it's moving fast. Things are changing. It somewhat reminds me, although I definitely think it's different, of blockchain a few years ago. Probably a good 7, 8 years ago, where it was the only thing you heard about. And blockchain is a very real thing. I don't think we've seen necessarily the impact of it in the software world as much as what some of the projections were, 8, 10 years ago. AI has that same hype, but what's different is that impact is absolutely already being felt. I think there's just so many use cases. I don't care if it's at an individual work level, at a product level. I go out and visit customers a lot. Every single customer, doesn't matter the industry, they're all thinking about it. Now, I think a lot are in very similar places. They're kind of trying to just scratch the surface and figure out what it can mean for them, which I think is absolutely normal and understandable. You see some that are forming very intense committees across their business to evaluate different use cases. Certainly at Trintech, it is and has been a very, very active discussion, both how we use it as a company for internal use and also how we use it and deploy it in our products. I do think we're on the cutting edge, at least in our respective space on that topic. We already have functionality available in our Cadency platform. We've got more coming by the end of the year. We've got an early release or kind of an early adopter program coming for our address solution. So there's a lot it can do. I think there's some fear around it for people that think it's going to replace jobs, but I don't necessarily see it that way. I see it as an accelerator. I think it's something that can just make you more effective as an individual. Everyone is becoming familiar with ChatGPT. Almost every day, I'm learning just new, subtle, small ways to use it and do things for myself. Even if worst case you use it as a Google on steroids, it's more effective than Google. So it's an interesting world. It's fun, but I think purely from a business perspective, there's a lot of application to it, and I think it's only going to continue to grow and help companies.
Jamey, I'm not sure if you had another one you wanted to go into, but I have two more personal questions at the moment.
Sure.
You talk about a lot of growth kind of like in your business world. Like, how do you as a person continue to challenge yourself to grow, whether it's outside of work, different hobbies that you do? Are there anything that you are like, just for you personally?
I think I've always been a rather reflective person, even when I was younger. I do try to find time, even if it's, an hour here, hour there, and go to the local B dubs and just by myself. And that's just an example, but I do try to get that alone time to reflect.
Mm.
I think I don't care if it's from a personal perspective, a professional perspective, maybe it's traveling back from a customer visit, whatever the case may be. I think you've got to spend time reflecting on things at hand. Otherwise, you run the risk of kind of driving yourself crazy, running yourself down, all those things. I think that's something I've always been relatively thoughtful about doing. Um, and I know I don't always get it right, right? I know I'm not perfect, whether it's on the home front, whether it's in work. I think about often how I handle certain situations. Did I say this right? Was it the right approach? Should I have done this differently? Um, so I try to do that on a semi-regular basis, to find that just alone time to let the thoughts kind of, mature and articulate. So like I said, it's something that's kind of always been with me since I was young. I used to be
Yeah.
even when I was, a child, I couldn't always sleep very well because I had a very active brain. I'd lay awake thinking about whatever silly childhood thing was going on at the time, and some of that has kind of stayed with me, into the adult years. So um, I don't know how much that helps, but I do
Yeah.
think it at least levels me out and kind of keeps me honest.
The willingness to kind of self-reflect on like
Yep.
all of that is really powerful. And then what do you do for fun? Like your work can be really intense. Do you have fun hobbies that you like to do
Yeah.
as well?
Well, I used to play basketball all the time. That was number one. I don't do that as much. I've ruptured both of my Achilles tendons over the years playing basketball. And I kind of kept playing for a little bit after that, but I started to worry that the next surgeries were just going to continue to move up the legs.
Mhm.
So I'm mostly retired from that. Enjoy friends, enjoy family. As I mentioned earlier, I was a big family, a lot to do there, plenty of times. Big sports fan, more football. So in the fall there's plenty of events around watching games and getting together with family on that. So nothing too overcomplicated, but enjoy a good game or enjoy a good happy hour or enjoy time with the family.
Yeah.
I think the last thing I'd want to ask is just give you a chance to plug what you do on the day to day. So if somebody's been listening to this or hearing about Trintech, a little bit about Cadency, is like, hey, what's the pitch for why might I go to Trintech's website? And then if you want to plug anything for the Jesse brand as well.
You're putting my sales skills on notice here. So no, so we help companies with financial close, and everything around the month end process. So we've got multiple products that can support that depending on the size of the company in question. We offer a lot of benefits around automating what are typically very manual heavy tasks, across, or that can cost companies in some cases weeks, a week, 2 weeks to get through every single month. And being able to automate so much of that allows, typically rather expensive staff members to focus more on strategic initiatives within the office of the CFO. It's critical items that have to get done because it's kind of the starting point of what will eventually end up in your financial reporting. And we can really put a lot more trust in that process. So, I feel pretty good about the products that we offer, and that they've kind of stood the test of time. So hopefully that's a good enough a pitch to get you to the website. But always happy to have those conversations more in depth. And I guess for my own brand, I don't have anything. I try to be a relatively modest person in that regard. But I guess for any potential good salespeople out there, I hope you've heard enough about the culture here. We're always looking to hire great talent, people that are willing to work hard and roll up their sleeves and make a difference in our customers' lives. So if you hear that in this, then we're definitely the place for you.
That's awesome. Is there one, like if somebody was going to have one takeaway from this conversation to kind of impact their life, what would you want that takeaway to be?
To impact their life. That's hard. Listen, if you're early in your career and you think leadership's for you, push on it, explore it. Find mentors. Even going back to my time at Thompson, I had several mentors there as well. I think we all have these big goals and big dreams when we're younger in our career, and they're all achievable. But as I mentioned earlier, you got to fight for it. You've got to want it. You got to be willing to put the work in. But you don't have to do it alone. I think that's the key part. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to lean on others and seek out that advice. And I think you'll find more times than not, you're going to have a lot of people that are willing to offer it. People that have been through similar experiences themselves and can give you guidance. So push for it, chase it, but don't feel like you got to do it on your own.
That's great. It's really encouraging to hear. And I can see that through the glimpse of stories that I've heard from you of how you've done that same thing and lived it out. So thank you for sharing with us some of your experience. It's been really encouraging to hear.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the time. It's been a fun conversation. I'll have to reach out to a few people to kind of give them some heck for some of the background feedback. But no, I appreciate it. It's been great having the conversation, and obviously, Jamey, appreciate all the work we've done together and all the help you've given to myself in my career, along with many others here at Trintech.
Likewise, appreciate it, Jesse.
Thanks for joining us today. Follow along on our YouTube where we release our episodes early. We hope today's conversation inspired you, and we'd love to hear what insights you took away. So please comment below, and we look forward to seeing you next time.